Marriage is unique among the sacraments in that, I suppose strictly speaking, it's the one that we wouldn't really say was instituted by Christ. Christ began, he instituted all of the other sacraments. They were foreshadowed in the Old Testament, but began properly with Jesus. So we see foreshadowing of baptism in Noah and the ark and the parting of the Red Sea, even in the ritual mitzvah of the Israelite people. But baptism, strictly speaking, begins with Jesus. We see foreshadowing of the Eucharist in the Passover dinner, in the sacrifice of the temple. But the Eucharist begins with Jesus. When it comes to marriage, it's no surprise that that existed before Jesus. And so we say that Jesus elevated marriage. That he took what was very natural and made it into something supernatural. He made it a conduit of grace. Marriage is really unique, not just among the sacraments, but among all of the institutions of our world and of history. Because it is the first. It goes back quite literally to the beginning. That the first community that ever existed was Adam and Eve. The man who said at last, "This is bone of my bones and flesh of his flesh." And he clung to his wife, and the two became one. So marriage is quite unique. It was created as part of paradise. We often refer to the Garden of Eden as paradise. And so part of God's plan for paradise was marriage. But paradise has been lost. When sin entered into the world, paradise on this earth was no more. And the sin of our first parents was not just a personal sin that had consequences in their lives, but we say that when they fell, the whole world fell. And it's probably right to say that the whole world really fell apart, is what happened. Nothing was the way that it was supposed to be anymore. God created all things, and he created them to be good. When he looked at his creation, at each individual element, he said, "It is good." And when he gets to man and woman created in his own image and likeness, he in fact says, "And this is very good." But when we look at the history of the world, when we turn on the news today, oftentimes very good is not the first thing that comes to mind. We don't look at creation. We don't look at those made in his image and likeness as doing very good right now. In fact, it's very clear that things aren't the way they were meant to be. We have chaos in the world. And because marriage was part of paradise, part of that original plan, it too was subject to the fall. It too fell apart in a certain sense when sin entered into the world. And so what was and is the building block of society, the very first society on which everything else is built upon, is chaotic. Throughout history and in our own time. Marriages come and go. Divorces can be messy and abundant. The family, which is meant to be a unit of love, is often one of disappointment, where young children find themselves growing up without parents, where elderly parents find themselves without children to care for them. The people that we're supposed to love and trust the most become the ones who betray us and hurt us the most. We can still see the good in marriage and family life, but we can also see the chaos. What we have proclaimed to us today is good news, because Jesus came to restore what we had lost. He came to heal what we have broken. He came to give us paradise again. He came to make paradise possible. And so one of the things he did, not as a side project or as an added bonus, but essential to his mission, was the redemption of marriage and family life. That he elevated it to the level of a sacrament. That is, he made it so that marriage can be an occasion of grace for husband and wife and children alike. That was the heart of Jesus' mission. It's why he came and lived and preached and healed and suffered and died and rose again, so that we might have paradise. Because we also call heaven paradise, not just the Garden of Eden. Paradise has been lost, but paradise has been regained thanks to Jesus. And that's true for marriage as well. We also speak of Jesus' work as a recreation. Maybe you have read or seen videos of Bishop Robert Barron. I'm generally a big fan of his. And one of my favorite things, though, is that he can't just speak one language. He's a very smart man. But if you've ever listened to him, he'll much prefer just to throw in a little French and Hebrew and Greek and some Latin in there. When he was writing his big Catholicism project that he's maybe most famous for, he was a scholar in residence at the seminary where I was. And so he would give us these lectures all the time, which were great and wonderful. But we would keep a little tally in the corner of our notebooks about how many times he slipped into another language. He would never say Messiah. It was always Mashiach, right? Things like that. So one of my favorite Hebrew words that I learned from his talks, from his videos, is the words from the first line of Genesis. In English, it says that the Spirit swept over the waters at the beginning of creation. But waters is a pretty lame translation, actually, of the Hebrew. The Hebrew word is Tohu Wa-bohu, which is just fun to say. You should try it sometime. It's no wonder that Bishop Barron uses that all the time, because that's much more fun than water. The Spirit swept over the Tohu Wa-bohu. And the Tohu Wa-bohu is primordial chaos. And we speak of it as the waters because if you've ever been out at sea, and most people haven't, most people have seen the sea, but if you've ever been out at sea, like so far out into the ocean, that you can't dream of seeing land, where you see stars that you've never seen before, and there's nothing but this expanse of space above you. Maybe you're over the Mariana Trench, and you can't imagine the depths below you. And the waters are dangerous and unpredictable. Those are the waters that the Spirit swept over. Primordial chaos. And out of chaos, God brings order. That's what the story of creation is. There was nothing, there was chaos, and now there is all that we see. From nothing, God brings something, and he orders it. He sets it up just right. We have that very systematic account, day 1, day 2, day 3. He's moving intentionally. And what we're left with is paradise. And what does our sin do but reintroduce chaos into the world? We undo what God has done. And isn't that what we do in our own lives too? We're sometimes the worst source of chaos in our own lives. And we don't like that, but we do it anyway. That's what sin does to us, and that's what sin did to the world. Chaos. And so when Jesus comes onto the scene, what he does is reestablishes order. He's recreating the world, making paradise possible again. And so when the Pharisees approach Jesus to try and test him and trick him and say, is it lawful for a husband to divorce his wife? He says, well, what did Moses command you? And they said, well, Moses would permit a man to divorce his wife. And Jesus says, yes, but it was because of the hardness of your heart that he allowed that. It was an extreme measure to keep what was broken from becoming demolished, what was in crisis from being wiped out. It enabled them to hang on to some order in the midst of chaos. And you don't even have to look past the Bible to see the chaos of this mistress and this act of adultery, and then there's a baby from that, so we're going to have to kill the husband, and this is chaos. And so Moses permitted this for the hardness of your hearts, but Jesus says from the beginning of creation, it was not so. You're not meant to just hang on by a thread. It doesn't have to be the way it feels like it's always been. Because in the beginning, God made them male and female, and for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one. So they're no longer two, but one flesh. And so what God joins together, no human being must separate. He makes the marriage and family of paradise possible again in our own day and in our own lives. And this is good news. Because no one wants the chaotic marriage. No bride and groom stand in front of the altar and say, I hope this works out for the next few years. That's no one's dream. That's no one's goal. But to look into the eyes of your beloved and say, for better, for worse, for richer, for poor, in sickness or health, till death do us part. Now that's something. That's a little piece of paradise on earth. To have that kind of unconditional love. But we look at that and we're skeptical. Because you don't even have to open the history books to know that till death do us part is rare these days, or it feels like it anyway. Can it really be done? Can you really experience that kind of faithfulness and that kind of love? Can you really count on another human being to be with you till death do us part? And the good news of today's gospel is Jesus says, yes, it is possible. It's not easy, but it's possible by the grace of God. The grace that comes from Jesus Christ makes it possible to make that kind of a commitment. And we need to hear this good news in our own day. Because the temptation to settle for less is real. The temptation to throw in the towel is strong. But Jesus Christ, the Son of God, has come to restore what was lost and to bring order, especially where there's chaos. And he has taken the beautiful institution of marriage and he's lifted it up. He's elevated it to be a sacrament, to be a conduit of his grace and a path to the paradise we call heaven. It's possible to interpret today's gospel as a harsh warning and strong words, because there are harsh warnings and strong words in there. But what it is a great call. Jesus demands much of his followers. Till death do us part. Because Jesus has great plans for those who follow him. He doesn't want to lead you to mediocrity. He doesn't want to lead you to surviving and just getting by. He wants to lead you to life in abundance, to paradise. And so, though it may feel like the Catholic Church is the lone man crying out in the darkness, wondering if anyone is listening, it feels sometimes as if everyone else is just pleased to settle. But when I looked into the eyes of the two 20-year-olds that I married yesterday, and I looked in the eyes of the couple at the reception that had been married 52 years, I didn't see a desire to settle. I didn't see a desire for mediocrity or a tolerance for chaos, but a commitment of unconditional and undying love that won't settle for anything less than heaven. Because for a couple rooted in Christian love, till death do us part is not long enough, and only heaven will suffice. Jesus today proclaims good news about marriage, about its redemption, its recreation, its elevation, its possibilities. So when all of the chaos of this world is shouting at you to settle or be realistic, let the good news of Jesus echo through your mind and heart. Because God has great love planned for those who follow him. It will often involve the road of the cross, but it's the cross that leads to paradise.